What's going on, you guys? It's Tyler here from Integratio, and today we're going to be discussing the Novation Bass Station 2 and whether or not it's still a synth worth having in your arsenal even so many years after its release. With this synth, you can get everything from classic analog bass sounds to old school Nintendo style leads and even some more unusual timbres that you might not expect. I want to start off by talking about just how well the bass station is built. Now, while it is made of plastic, it feels entirely sturdy and durable, especially compared to the first iteration of the bass station for those who ever played around with that one. Now, I've used this extensively over the years through shows, gigs, you name it, and it's held up pretty beautifully over time. Now, one of my favorite things about the design of this interface has to be the knobs. They're far better than what you'd find on your average cheap synth, and this is a relatively cheap synth by all means. The rubber on here feels incredibly sturdy in the hands, and they have a decent amount of tension. I also love the fact that Novation included this very large filter knob over here that's much larger than the rest of the knobs, as the filter is what you'd likely be using most often anyway. Now, if we flip this up and look at the back panel, we can see that we have a series of connections, including the headphone jack right here, which does have a dedicated level knob, a line output, which is a mono line 1/4 inch output, an external in if you want to process any external audio such as guitars or keyboards, then you can take advantage of the onboard filters and envelopes. You have the sustain input, which you can connect with a standard foot switch. Moving over, we have MIDI in and out, a USB connection for hooking up to the computer. You can download updated firmware for this, which I believe the latest one changed this from monophonic to paraphonic. Don't quote me on that if I'm wrong, but I believe that's the case. And you can also use this as a bus-powered port right here. So as you can see, if you switch to USB, you can power it via USB. And if you switch to the external DC, 9-volt DC, you can power it via DC. So, not tons of inputs on the back, but the connectivity is pretty much what you would expect from a synth in this range. Now, coming down to the bottom left, we have your standard pitch bend and modulation wheels, which are backlit with this blue LED light. Above the wheels, you'll find larger rubberized octave switch buttons, and at the very top, you will find an LED display with handy little cursor switch buttons below, and a number of other easy-to-navigate buttons, sliders, and knobs all across the interface. Now, I also just want to note that when you adjust the knobs, the value, as you can see right here, shows up on the LED, which can be helpful to give you a reference as to what you're doing and what kind of adjustments that you're making. There are also these little LED dots, as you can see, that appear as you start making adjustments. And that tells you what the value was set at for the preset. So just in case you start making changes and you want to backtrack to where you started, you'll know what direction to head in. As for the keybed, we have a 25 key keybed that does use aftertouch, and this feels a lot like the Korg Minilog to me. I like that the keys are relatively large, as it makes it easy to switch between more complex chords, especially when using the Arpeggiator. Now, every sound that you hear in this synth starts from the Oscillator section, and it's important to note that these are analog oscillators, and this is an analog synth. There isn't any modeling that is going on here, and the only reason many people get confused is because it has digital control, which is why we're able to save presets and call them back. All right, so to get to our initial patches, we will need to go up into the 70s range. You can hear what that sounds like. Basic Sawtooth wave. Now we do have dual oscillators, which you can control via the little selection switch right here. We're on oscillator 1. We can control oscillator 1 from there. When we switch to oscillator 2, we can control oscillator 2 from there. Now, the patch that you're hearing, like I said, is a basic Sawtooth waveform. exactly what you would expect. Now when switching octaves, you can hear the range that this thing has, which is pretty incredible. All the way down there, we get kind of into the LFO range. Now if we take it all the way up, we get into this sort of dog whistle range. Which is almost unusable. You can barely even hear that actually. But it just goes to show how versatile this synth is octave-wise. Now, of course, we have a few more waveforms that we can mess around with here. So you can see we are on the triangle right now. Square wave right there. And we have a sine wave. Nice soft sine wave. And triangle wave if we want a little bit more harmonic information. All right, so if we go back and reset the initial patch right there, go to our square waveform, we also have the pulse width control, which is just to the right of the LFO knobs, which we can adjust via the mod envelope manually or via LFO 2. That has some pretty cool sounds. I actually like the way that this pulse width control sounds on the synth, especially if you add a chorus or something in post. Now the mixer section is what starts opening up the initial patches to a few more sources. For starters, we have the sub oscillator, which is right here. And we can switch the octaves using this switch. And there are a few different waveforms that we can play around with right here too. This is a sine wave, a pulse wave, and a square wave. Now it's important to note that the pitch of the sub-oscillator is taken from oscillator 1, meaning you can get your first oscillator, pair it with the sub, and tune the second oscillator in any way that you'd like. As you can see, you also get plus and minus 12 semitones with the oscillators, so plenty of room to play around with. As well as a fine-tune knob right here that is plus or minus 100 cents on the two oscillators. All right, now going back into the mixer section, we also have a way to mix multiple sources, including the two oscillators, the sub-oscillator, and this little multi-function knob here in the middle. That allows you to mix either an external input, something coming into the synth if you want to take advantage of the filters. Also the ring modulation right here, which you can see, test that out really quick. You get some pretty gnarly sounds out of that. And then we also have this little white noise generator right here. And that just generates regular white noise, no pink noise or anything else. Now over here we have the filter section. This is acting on your basic sawtooth wave that we started with. And right now, as you can see, we're set to the classic filter, which is what you're hearing. It's one of the two main types of filters on this synth. The classic filter comes from the original base station, giving you access to both the 12 and 24 dB per octave slopes, which you can switch with this little switch right here, as well as 3 different switchable shape modes: low pass, band pass, and high pass. Then we have the acid filter, which you can switch up here, the type, and that is a diode ladder filter, which they most likely named acid because it's very similar to what you would hear on the old 303. Let's check out this classic filter first. Add a little bit of resonance. Now the filter is incredibly smooth, as you can hear. Let's check out the 12 dB per octave. Switch that back. Now the 12 and 24 dB switches have slightly different characteristics, and the 12 to me is just a bit smoother. Let's check out bandpass. And the high pass. Nasty. All right, now let's see what that acid filter sounds like. Yeah, and just note that the acid filter, the filter itself is fixed, so you don't get access to the slope or the shape parameters right here. You can really get a little 303 kind of sequence going with that. You want to make sure the decay is down pretty low. It's definitely capable of that old school Fatboy Slim, Chemical Brothers style of music. So if that's what you're making, this synth is definitely capable of that. So one of the unique things about this filter section is that you also have an overdrive knob and a distortion knob. The overdrive here allows you to add a bit of drive and saturation before the filter, while the analog distortion on the end allows you to drive the sound post-filter. Now listen, you can actually hear some low harmonics being added as I bring the distortion up, especially as you bring the resonance in. Now it's very nice and subtle, though it's the perfect little parameter for adding a slight bit of extra character when you need it. However, if you really want to crank things up, the distortion knob post is far better. Yeah, you can really start getting into that sort of squelchy territory, which can be great for heavier analog sounds. Now, I wouldn't say that the filter is the most recognizable right off the bat. We just did a review of the Mini Moog Voyager Electric Blue Edition, which has a very unique filter sound that you can almost suss out in a song. And if you want to check out that review, definitely subscribe to Integratio and check out the other YouTube videos on our channel. But it doesn't have as unique of a filter sound as that Mini Moog. And the same thing goes, you know, for the MS-20, it's a lot more of a recognizable filter sound. However, with that said, it is very versatile and allows you to dial in a vast number of filter sounds, which is nice. Then we have a few LFOs down here. Now LFO 2 is routed to the LFO 2 depth knob in the filter section. You have a few different waveforms to play around with as well. As you can hear, there's a pretty high range on that rate. You can also switch it to the delay setting, and that gives you more of a slow fade in with the LFO effect, which is nice for lighter pads and such. Now, right above the pitch and modulation wheels, we have the sequencer and arpeggiator section, which has all of your typical parameters. You can turn that on. Let's see what that sounds like. Latched right now. You have a 4-octave range on this thing. Quite a range, and also a latch button, like I said right here, which is great for if you're holding an arpeggiated chord, or if you want to do something along the lines of a droning pad. You get that, but if I turn the ARP off, just latch, you kind of just let a note go, and from there you have the ability to kind of play around with it. There's also a ton of different rhythms built into here. which is pretty cool. And then you can also change the way that the arpeggiator moves. So we have an up pattern, down pattern, up, down, 2. Again, lot of different variables to mess around with in the Arpeggiator section. Of course, we also have the 32-step sequencer on board. So if we go right here to record on this last knob, we can hit a note, then rest, another note, rest, another note, rest, so on, until you get all the notes that you want. Then you go back to play right here. From there, you can play that same pattern that you just punched in. Let's latch that. Pretty cool. Now, while we're on the topic of the arpeggiator, I do want to talk about the hidden functions that we have all along the top of the keybed here. These hidden functions can be accessed by pressing the function key and then selecting one of the chosen functions that you have in mind. So because we are on the arpeggiator right now, let's go to function and let's test out this swing right here. It's pretty cool. So now if we go to the arpeggiator, we get a chord. And you can see as I take the value up, we are getting more and more swing. Right, and that's just one of the few functions across. Again, like you have a limiter on here, a velocity mod envelope. You can also use the slew for the LF2, which is great for these sort of old school laser sounds. The thing about the hidden functions is that it can be a bit annoying, but considering the fact that this synth is pretty small and compact, there's not room for all of these functions on the interface itself. So, you figure out how to access them and you sort of build that muscle memory over time, especially if you're using them a lot. And right down here, we have the envelope section. Now the base station does have 2 envelopes, which you can use to sort of shape your sound over time. One is the amp envelope, which is right up here, and that's going to control the dynamics of the sound over time. I decided to go to the first patch on the synth right here so we can sort of hear what that sounds like initially. Now if we change the attack, decay, sustain, and release, let's bring those all down. Not getting anything, right? A nice sort of like sucking motion into that attack right there. Turn the sustain and release up. And get some nice, long, sustained, held out pads. And that's going to be great for strings, synth pads, anything of that like. We also have the mod envelope right here, and the mod envelope can either be applied to the pitch of the oscillators or the cutoff frequency of the filters. So sort of hear what that sounds like. We also have a way to chain both of the envelopes together so that they share the same ADSR times, and that is just kind of a nice thing if we want everything to feel more in sync. Of course, the attack, decay, sustain, and release work just like they would on any normal synth. The attack is going to set how long the envelope takes to get to that peak level. The decay is going to set how long the envelope takes to get from the peak level to the sustain. The sustain is going to set what the level sound stays at after the attack and decay stages have passed. And then finally, we have the release setting that is going to set how long it takes to get from the sustain level to the 0 level after you finally release the key. And finally, we have this trigger switch right here, which allows you to choose how the envelopes are triggered. Now, if we set that to single mode, the envelopes won't re-trigger when you play legato notes. However, if we set it to multi-mode, the envelopes will retrigger no matter how you play the notes. And we also have the auto glide mode, which applies portamento to any legato notes, though not notes that are played detached from one another. We can check that out with the portamento feature. Where you can get a lot of time between notes, which is pretty neat. Now lastly, you can also set the depth of each envelope so that they are modulated depending on how hard you press the key, and you can set this with the on key functions for both the amp and mod envelopes, which is another just cool, handy, hidden feature of the bass station. Now that you have a pretty good idea of how everything works on the synthesizer, let's go through some of the onboard presets and patches so you can hear what this thing is capable of. Overall, the Bass Station 2 is one of my favorite long-term synths. You get quite a bang for your buck considering the low price. Tons of different sounds on here, endless routing possibilities, and all of that is wrapped up in a small, easy to navigate portable package that's great for use on the go. This was actually one of my very first synthesizers that I ever purchased, and I highly recommend it for anyone just getting their feet wet in the world of synthesis. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. My name is Tyler. Subscribe to Integratio for more videos just like this one, and I hope to see you next time.